Okay, so I'm Robin Riddle. I'm both with Brain Support Network and with Stanford Parkinson's Community Outreach, and we're the co-hosts today. So glad to have you here. My father, Larry Riddle, had PSP. He was diagnosed back in 2004, and he passed away in 2007. And at that time in 2004, I started a local support group here in the San Francisco Bay Area for people with PSP. And then a physical therapist at a place called the Parkinson's Institute said, oh, hey, you could help a lot more people if you include more of the atypical Parkinsonism disorders like CBD and MSA and eventually Lewy body dementia. So we include all the disorders in our local support group. And we have not quite 45 people. Eventually we'll have about 45 people here today and 150 people on Zoom. And I hope you Zoom people have made it back. So today, just looking at the big picture today seems quite emotionally complicated. There's this Father's Day Eve and graduation weekend here at Stanford. Our colleagues are graduating today at Santa Clara University, just a little bit south of us. We've got protests going on today. We've got military parade going on today. It's Flag Day. So we've got quite a lot going on. A happy Father's Day to all of you fathers out there. And inside this room and on your screens, our focus though for the next several hours is on caregiving, which of course also has its emotional challenges, just like all of those other things I mentioned. So we have a great lineup of speakers today, and I'm going to start it off by introducing our first speaker, who's Dr. Dale Larson. He's a clinical psychologist and he's a professor of counseling psychology at Santa Clara University, and he's very interested in helping caregivers meet their challenges and find some joy in what they do. So I'm happy to introduce Dr. Dale Larson.
Thank you, Robin. It is really great to be here. It's great to see all of you here. I think we should start by giving a big round of applause for the Brain Support Network and Stanford and everyone who's worked so hard to put this day together. Give them a big round of applause, really. And, you know, I also think that it's appropriate to give all of you, to give ourselves a round of applause for getting here and being here. So it's not easy, and I know that. You know, I have spent most of my career in the end of life arena, in hospice oncology, bereavement, and palliative care. And I'm hoping to bring some of the things I've learned along the way as a clinician, as a researcher, as a professor, writing and reading about all this to you today. I'm hoping that can be helpful to you on your caregiving journey. I have had some experience myself with you know, the adjacent illness of Parkinson's. This is my father on the left. This is our wedding ceremony, actually, 1983, my wife and I, and my mother's on the right. And I was a caregiver to the caregiver because they were in Joliet, Illinois. And I was able to get back and visit them and support my mom. My sister was also nearby, and she was able to support my mom and my dad as they went through Parkinson's. And he was in very far along in the illness, but he was hanging on. And the last words he shared to me as we were taking him to the hospital in Joliet, Illinois, that those were, I'm not out of the woods yet. And as it turned out, he wasn't. He died of aspiration pneumonia a couple of days later. So it's very sad, but I went through that with my father. And also, one of my best friends in my life, my roommate from the University of Chicago, Jay Van Sant, who was a fantastic person, one of the most amazing people I've ever known. He had Parkinson's, and he had exercised his way for a long time existing and living through Parkinson's. He was also a Buddhist monk and high-tech guy, really, and Buddhist monk at the same time. And I was visiting him, and his primary caregiver was Barb, his wife, a nurse. And I would go up and support them as much as I could and call and be with them. And it was very sad, as all of you are overly familiar with the sadness that comes when you see the progression of these diseases. I want to today try to bring some good news. I'm going to address the bad news first, which is all too familiar to you, that these are very serious illnesses and create a lot of pain and suffering. And there's been some other news in the media that I want to counteract, which I think will give you some relief, perhaps, as we go along. And I think that'll be very good news, so I'll leave that as a surprise for later. I'm going to also talk about empathy, compassion, the challenge of caregiving. And empathy and compassion have really been a big focus in my work. And I've tried to understand, in all these different contexts that I've worked in, how do we maintain our compassion? I work primarily with physicians, nurses, social workers, clergy, and other health professionals. How do we maintain our compassion and our empathy while we assist, and I think it's courageously assist people to live with hope in a world in which loss is inescapable? And I'm going to try to describe what I've learned on that journey, trying to understand that challenge. And then I'm going to talk about self-efficacy and social support. One of the things that we've learned in the literature and research is that self-efficacy and social support play big roles in how we cope with illness generally and how we cope with these kinds of challenges in caregiving. One of the key things that I'm going to emphasize is social support. I was just so delighted to see all the support groups that are available for caregivers that the Brain Support Network makes available. And, I was realizing that, I'm speaking to probably the ideal support network right here in this very room. Forgive me for sharing the story because you've heard it 100 times, but the story of the person who's in the town and the water's rising. Because one of the things we've learned is that people don't avail themselves, and this is a research finding, with all the support that is actually accessible if you really look at it objectively. So the water's rising, and the guy's in his house, and he says, I'm coming up on the roof. He goes up on the roof, and he's there, and the rescue boats come, and he says, no, I'm putting my faith in the Lord. The water's rising more. And finally, a helicopter comes. He says, no, I'm putting my faith in the Lord. Sure enough, the water washes him into the river, and he drowns, and he's up at the pearly gates. He looks up at St. Peter and said, look, what? I put my faith in the Lord. What's this about? I drowned. And St. Peter looked at him and said, I don't know what you're complaining about. We sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. Now, you've all heard that. Look around the room. And I want to ask you, please, to make eye contact. I know this is anxiety-provoking, but look around at everybody in the room, as many people as you can. Actually make eye contact. It's very anxiety-provoking. But make eye contact, and see boats and helicopters. They're already here, folks. So I want you to really remind yourself of that during the day, in between the breaks, at lunch, and afterwards. Really talk to people. This is the ideal support network for us all. The other topic that I really want to explore is transforming loss and finding meaning, which are really central features in all this. And loss is such an important part of it. Caregiving for anyone with a serious illness asks more of us. It's very challenging, no matter what your role is, whether you're professional, volunteer, family caregiver. Caregiving for PSP-MSA-CBD, people suffering with those illnesses, is even more challenging. It asks more of us, and it does involve a lot of loss, multiple losses along the way on this journey, which are quite great. Freud said, we are never so vulnerable as when we love. I think it's a pretty profound statement. And Francis Bacon said, to love is to give hostages to fortune. So grief is the ransom we pay to love. And when we love someone, we've invested so much of ourselves in that person and in that experience they're having that we grieve as they suffer tremendously. And we're heading toward, with fatal illnesses, inevitably, sadly, we're heading toward those final end-of-life conversations I've written about, the conversations that are just so awfully difficult, the conversations that go, please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. Goodbye. 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 Very sad, but very real, and they're conversations we face in these contexts. I'm not an expert on these illnesses, and I'm not an expert on family caregiving either. And I've consulted with a good friend of mine who's really one of the leaders in gerontology and caregiving, Bill Haley at the University of South Florida. And Bill is just fantastic. We've co-authored things, and he is leading the way in terms of championing caregiving in the United States, fighting for a lot of different things. And Bill was very gracious and gave me a few slides and some really good ideas and some updates on recent research that I want to share. So thank you, Bill, for that. The bad news, and it's not news to you, is that we find in research that these caregiving experiences with difficult situations like you're facing do lead to increases in depression and anxiety. How many of you are depressed and anxious right now at the same time? It's kind of comes with the territory sometimes, right? It's not it's something we can't overcome, but it's there. Also, the research has shown that the COVID experience, the COVID-19, just challenged us so much, challenged caregivers so much. How many of you were caregiving during COVID? Yeah, that's a very tough situation, isn't it? Where you're panicked about everything. And is this illness going to come into my home? Is it going to affect my loved one? Is it going to affect me? Because if I develop it, what's going to happen to all of us? So that's obvious that's been a very big challenge for all of us. That there's a lack of workplace support. Those of you who are working in our caregiving, I think you've probably experienced that. This is not happening at the level we need it to happen. And then there's no paid leave, no coverage for in-home long-term care. It's not enough whenever it exists in any way. And this is what Bill Haley's been championing nationally, trying to get more action on that. And with our current administration, my pessimism is increasing, but I'm hoping that we can make a difference at that level. So the research shows that these are the realities that we're dealing with as caregivers. Now, one of the other realities is that, being in stressful situations can lead to what we know as burnout. And I was at Berkeley with Chris Maslach, who developed the basic ideas about burnout. And the key characteristics of burnout are three things: demoralization, the sense of I can't do well at doing good, which we often feel in caregiving. I'm not making enough progress, or I'm not being successful in this moment, kind of a helplessness that one feels. Diminished caring, kind of pulling back. I'm just kind of emotionally drained, burned out. I can't handle it anymore. I'm so overwhelmed, I'm kind of traumatized. We pull back a little bit. That's another feature of burnout when we're feeling burned out. And then exhaustion, which is really the key characteristic of burnout. And one definition, as somebody tossed out, was emotional, physical exhaustion resulting from long-term involvement with people in stressful situations. What burnout is. We can experience it as professionals. We can experience it as family caregivers. But and the antidotes to these are the antidote to demoralization is efficacy, which I'm going to talk about, to developing a kind of self-efficacy, efficacy in this experience. The other element is this diminished caring, and the solution to that is involvement, commitment. And paradoxically, almost, being committed can be a stress buffer, because when we avoid, we feel less good about ourselves. So it's kind of one of those realities in psychology. And finally, for fatigue, we have to countered that with energy. How do we sustain our energy? Do we do it through exercise? Do we do it through all the other things we do in self-care? But we have to maintain our energy, maintain ourselves as caregivers. But my friend Alan Pines is a psychologist who sadly died about 12 years ago, an Israeli psychologist I did work with, published with. She said that poignantly, burnout results from a failure in the search for meaning. Failure in the search for meaning. So an antidote to burnout might be finding meaning, and we'll talk about that as we go on today. Rachel Naomi Raymond, you might have known her in the Bay Area here. She said that burnout results from a failure to grieve. Isn't that interesting? There was a study of more than 1,000 end-of-life professionals. This is really one of the really neat studies out there, looking at nurses, doctors, social workers, physical therapists, everyone working in end-of-life care, and they asked them, what are the major stressors facing you? And what they said was very interesting. The first thing at the top of the list was workload. The workload was excessive, and they had a hard time with that. But the number two stressor, which I found amazing and poignant, was no time to grieve. They felt they did not have time to grieve. Isn't that interesting? They didn't have time to grieve. So grieving is part of all this for us, finding a way to grieve. You know, burnout's a badge of honor, really. I think of it that way because you had to be on fire to burn out. How many of you have how many of you are members of the formerly burned out club? Raise your hand. You feel like I burned out and I'm back, right? You know, it's a badge of honor. You had to be on fire to burn out. So, you know, and one of the things that's interesting in the research is you can come back from burnout. It's not a permanent thing. It isn't like you're dead as a helper. You are able to come back. But we have those days we can be burned out for 2 weeks and feeling terrible, feeling guilty, feeling bad about ourselves. I'm not there anymore. I'm wiped out. But then you come back. You know, you take care of yourselves. So the key thing is to experience when you have these experiences that you associate with burnout, to say it's a wake-up call. It's time for me to take care of myself, to do something for myself instead of being judgmental toward oneself. To say, okay, I need to take care of myself. This is a signal from inside us. We have to listen to that. And when we listen to it, then we can take action to take care of ourselves. One of the other really, I think, great insights in the burnout literature is that it's not about bad apples. It's about bad cakes that we're in. So this is an important point to realize. You're normal people dealing with abnormal stressors. It's really critical to realize that. We often engage in self-blame where we blame people in situations. This is the fundamental attribution error in social psychology. When people are struggling, we say it must be the person, not the context. We tend to defocus on the context. But I encourage you all to think about the context you're in. It's hard to even take in how unusual this context is. People outside caregiving in these situations don't understand it at all, as many of you I'm sure have learned. It's like, well, I think you could do that, couldn't you? Yeah, or something like that. Or or they say, you know, it's absolutely impossible what you're doing, but they don't understand it. The good news is, well, first I want to say, you know, it's interesting how our body registers these experiences, because these are telomeres, the nucleoproteins that are on the tips of your chromosomes, and these are like aglets on your shoelace. They prevent replicative senescence. They're associated with all the degrees of diseases of aging. They're quite sensitive to that. So they're biological markers of aging and stress. Adults who've had adverse childhood experiences actually have shortened telomeres. So it's interesting. So stress can even affect us at the cellular level. And this is one of the things we're looking at. I had the good fortune of having lunch with Elizabeth Blackburn, who was the Nobel laureate, who got her Nobel for research on telomeres. And she said that they did a study with people and introduced meditation exercise that they did over 16 weeks, something, and found that actually improved telomere health, which I found amazing. So stress can have really serious consequences. It can affect us in all these different ways, and it can even affect us, you know, at a cellular level. Now, okay, The bad news, that is bad news, or it's difficult news, it's reality. But here's some things that aren't reality. These are things from the media that have talked about caregiving. Stress can take as many as 10 years off a person's life, actually shortening cell life, telomere health. Mortality rate that is 63% higher than on caregivers. I'm surprised that anybody is still alive in this room at this point. Stress kills caregivers. So, the normal person reading this, in the headlines and popular magazines and that, it's terrifying. And it just waits. Like, how could you do it? I'm surprised you haven't died yet. You're going to die soon if you do this, right? You die before the patient themselves. This is actually written. So here's the good news that Bill has shared with me. And I think it is very good news because this is based on surveys and extensive research that he and Roth and others are doing. There are psychological benefits from caregiving. Okay, positive news there. There's no elevated risk of mortality. You may have a longer life than you thought you were going to have. Isn't that amazing? I think it's quite remarkable. No immune system damage and no telomere shortening. Of course, we could all put one, we could say, well, that's not PSP-MSA-CBD caregiving. It's actually, well, it is based on hospice and dementia caregiving. And I think it's all very closely connected in terms of the experience of the caregiver. And so that's very encouraging news, isn't it? It's nice. And actually, people report less burden and more respite than we thought they were getting. So that's really wonderful. Now, this does not diminish in any way, trivialize the distress you're really having doing this caregiving. And Bill is not saying, we don't need to provide support to these people who are engaged in this. He's a total 100% advocate. But it's good to appreciate a little bit of the brighter side and not to overemphasize the difficult side of this work. So I want to bring that to you. I think it's very important. Now, the surveys of people show that they're reporting these kinds of benefits. So if anybody in the room could share just one word that might reflect, I've summarized these as giving back. What would be one word that you would have that would reflect what giving back is for you? What does it mean to you? Anybody just share one word? What is that? Peace. Nice. Very nice. Peace. How about pride? Can you have a word for pride? What does that feel like to have pride? This is what major surveys of caregivers show. They feel some pride. How many of you feel some of that? There's some pride. We're reluctant. We don't want, like my grandfather said, don't get the fat head. You don't want to, but we feel some pride in this. We should feel some pride. Enjoyment. That's a odd thing to report, isn't it? Caregivers reporting that was one of the key things that was reported. Enjoyment. I mean, I think of like a time when I was with Jay and Barb, his wife, the caregiver and nurse. And she said, Jay hasn't been getting up at all. And it wasn't very hard for him to move at this point with his Parkinson's. And I sat there and sitting there for hours with him. And finally, I went over and I put on the music really loud because he was having trouble hearing. And I put on the 70s music from the University of Chicago days. And Jay got out of his chair and started dancing. And Barb and I and Jay danced. And that was a blissful moment for me in the midst of all this suffering that I was experiencing with my really closest friend going through this brilliant man. And then doing the impossible. How many times have you heard from people, or indirectly or directly, that this is impossible? You couldn't be doing it. How could you possibly do it? I couldn't do that. It's impossible. You couldn't possibly do this. But people report, hey, I'm doing the impossible. I'm doing it. And I feel pride. And there's some enjoyment in this. And there's a lot that I get back. That's really important to register in the midst of all this. So I think the research is very cool in terms of presenting some of these findings. Now, the other good news is that, we're wired for caregiving. I mean, we have an altruistic brain. This is our phylogenetic inheritance. We have mirror neurons that are tuning us in to others and these complementary affective neural activities that are going on, enabling us to empathize with others. So empathy and compassion are slightly different. Empathy, the way Carl Rogers, one of my teachers, said, is sensing the other person's personal meanings and experiences as if they were your own, but without ever losing the as if quality. And that as if mention is very important, because when you lose the as if quality, it's a different experience, as I'm going to describe. Compassion is the emotional response to suffering that really allows us and activates a desire to take action and alleviate the suffering. So empathy is actually the bridge to compassion. Think about it that way. So our empathy is the bridge to compassion. And empathy, many studies have shown this. Empathy can go in the direction of personal distress, or it can go in the direction toward compassion. And so what we want to have is our empathy leading to compassion and not to personal distress. When it leads to personal distress, that disrupts the helping relationship and one's empathy with the person you're responding to. Make sense? So personal distress is a problem, and that's what can lead to burnout if you're in personal distress all the time. So we have to convert it. Now, the really interesting finding is that, this is huge in the positive psychology arena research, is that compassion is a stress buffer. Isn't that interesting? That you're actually, when you're in a state of compassion, a different part of the brain is activated than the part when you're in personal distress. So when you're in a compassionate state, you're not going to be burning out, which is, I think, absolutely stunning kind of finding. What we have to do is find a way to have our empathy converting to compassion. So, now we're all moving around on a continuum of emotional involvement. We're sometimes we're in over our heads. There's a crisis where we can't sleep at night. We've all had those times. And we're way over here, and it's very stressful. And then there can be way over here, lots of personal distress. There's no way to avoid it because you're overwhelmed. Although you might, if you're maybe a Buddhist monk or something, be able to do it, but most humans can't do it. And then over here, you're just wiped out and you're feeling burned out, distant, uninvolved in the moment. And you feel really badly about yourself. Personal distress is there as well. So what we have to do is find a way to be in this balanced kind of position here in the middle, where we can be more involved when we need to and less involved when we need to. I mean, we have to be emotionally involved with all the people we care for. This is a absolutely essential thing. But we have to find a way to be balanced in our empathy. This metaphor people have found helpful over the years. And it is that when you're helping someone and they're down in the pit, in the sense that they are in personal distress, they're suffering extreme things happening for them, we have to find a way to reach into the pit and help them out of the pit without falling into the pit ourselves. Right? So what do we hold on to that keeps us from falling in the pit? I'm going to argue self-efficacy. I'm going to argue social support, your faith, your communication skills, your exercise, all the things that increase your resilience. Those are the things we have to hold on to as we reach down into the pit and help our loved ones and the patients and our family members, all the people we're caring for, out of that pit. When we aren't able to do that, this can happen. Pretty amazing graphic. We are in Silicon Valley. Isn't this just awesome? It's like 25 years old. But when you're in the pit, you can't really help the person who's in the pit because you're distressed too. So you have to really find a way to reach into the pit without falling into the pit. And people have asked me, how do I know if I'm in the pit or not? And I think one of the really simple ways I think about this is the difference between sobbing and crying. Or I wouldn't say crying, just having a tear in your eye. How many of you have had a tear in your eye as a caregiver at some point? Raise your hands. Yeah, everyone has. That's natural. That's human. That's you as a human being with another person you care for who's suffering. Right? But sobbing is different. Sobbing is when the attention turns to yourself. And when attention turns to ourselves, that's when we defocus on the other. That's when we can go into personal distress and have our own experiences kind of dominate. So it's very important to keep that focus on the other. I asked one time 5,000 nurses I was lecturing to, and I said, how many of you have had a tear in your eye when you're working with patients or family members? And I swear, everyone raised their hand. They have all had a tear in their eye. And I said, for how many of you did the patient or family member run out of the room saying, my caregiver is having a feeling? And no one raised their hands. It was amazing. Maybe they were shy about that, but I think no one raised their hands. So, we have to stay out of what I call the helper's pit. We have to be balanced in our caregiving. Now, self-efficacy is a concept championed by Stanford's own Albert Bandura. And I loved Al. He was a real hero for me. I was encouraging him. I wasn't a close personal friend, but I did communicate with him quite a bit. And near the end of his life, he died not too long ago. He was writing what I think is a major book, Moral Disengagement. And I would encourage everybody to look at it. It was a book that grappled with the reality. How do people do bad things and feel good about themselves? Which I think is a topic we need to think about in today's world. And Al is, work on self-efficacy has permeated all the social sciences. It's been a central construct in understanding adaptation and coping, and just about everything I've ever looked at, self-efficacy finds its way into a measure or a way of understanding things. It's really interchangeable with the notion of confidence, and think about control. How much control do we feel? Do we feel like we can affect the outcomes we want to affect? Can we get it done? Can we get the job done in the moment? Can I do this? And you can have self-efficacy as a teacher, so it's domain specific. You can have self-efficacy as a physician. You can have it as a nurse. You can have it as a caregiver. So think about it that way. So specific kinds of ways we think about self-efficacy. There's another construct that's out there that was coined at the University of Chicago when I was there by one of my teachers, Sal Maddie and Susan Kabasa, stress hardiness. And stress hardiness, it was always summarizes the 3 C's: challenge, commitment, and control. So the idea was we stress hardy people see a challenge, not a threat. Stress hardy people make a commitment. Stress hardy people take control. And I guess what I'd like to say is that sometimes when you feel like things are out of control, a little bit of control is a lot better than a sense of no control. Just a little bit of control really gives you a good feeling, can really counteract a lot of things that cause us problems. So a little bit of control, think about that. Now, there is a self-efficacy scale for caregivers. And I found it really interesting looking at this. And, I wanted to share it with you because there are 3 categories, and one is obtaining respite. So it's the how much do you feel in control in terms of obtaining respite? The items go like this. Do you stay with the care recipient for a week when you need time for yourself? Obviously, endorsing that item means that you don't have a lot of control over that. Now, you might say, of course I have to. And I can understand that. Stay with the care recipient for a day when you need to see your doctor. You get the drift here. The idea is that we're consistently not finding a way. We don't feel we have any control. So we have to gain more control over respite for ourselves in terms of, and all this is correlated with different kinds of outcomes for caregivers. So quality of life and physical issues and all kinds of things. We have to control upsetting thoughts. And that's really in my wheelhouse in terms of studying things in psychology. So if we're really just obsessing and ruminating about things like this, what we're missing or giving up because of a care recipient, if that's all we're thinking about, or how unfair it is to have to put up with this situation. Now, it is unfair. And it is impossible and all that. And why is this happening? And all those questions that we ask. But if we're having those thoughts over and over again, ruminating, that's what causes problems and that can lead to depression. So we know that rumination is one of the major constructs now looking at depression. And Susan Nolan Hoeksema was one of the leading people who was here at Stanford before she went off to Yale. So think about that, controlling upsetting thoughts. Can I control upsetting thoughts? And then finally, responding to difficult situations or disruptive kinds of behavior, which can happen. I remember with Jay, sometimes he would do things and I was going, boy, Barb, you're able to maintain your composure when Jay is getting really angry about something. He was never like that in his entire life. I never saw this man angry, but he'd get very upset now. And she would be so calm and just comfort him and walk him through it. He's hallucinating. She would be with him and he would say, I don't know if you're real or not, and those kinds of things, but very comforting and very, very calming. Here's an example of one of the items. When he or she interrupts you for the fourth time while you're making dinner, you can respond without raising your voice. Sometimes that's difficult, isn't it? But it's one of the things we have to have more control over in these situations. And when we do, even though I can imagine you're saying, look, I'm dealing with this situation and sometimes I really lose it in this situation. Of course you do. And don't feel bad about that. But overall, we want to get more sense of self-efficacy in all these situations. What my advice is generally in these situations, if you feel like you really have to say something, don't. And if you say anything in these situations, make it slow, make it soft, make it simple. Stay with slow, soft, simple. And when you're in a situation, you're going like, oh, this is just terrible. Pause. One of the things we practice in end of life care is pause. Take a moment, take a deep breath, little diaphragmatic breathing. Okay, I'm going to slow down and down-regulate a little bit so then I can enter the situation in a calm way because I'm worked up. The amygdala is firing off and the HPA axis and I'm getting my, catecholamines are flying throughout my body. So you want to calm yourself in these situations. Oh, geez. What is this? Do you want to enable dictation? Not now, but I can't. Kevin? Yeah. It's calm. Such a nice day being with wonderful people. I don't want to say something. Not now. Not now. What is this? Don't ask again. I'm trying to push the button, but I'm not effective.
Is there any way you can ignore it?
I don't see a way. This is not my computer, so it's a Mac.
You want
It's a
to
PC Mac issue.
Don't ask.
Not
it.
now.
Yeah.
There we
okay.
go.
All right.
We got it okay? Thank you. Yeah. They're great. Okay. It's a little Mac thing. Yeah, it's a Mac thing. I always like PC. It's like a commercial, right? Of Macs versus PC. Hey, the conclusion is caregiving is hard. It is hard. I don't need to tell you that. But we can do hard things. Some of you have unrealistic expectations of yourselves in this role. There's a problem with that. Anybody confess to that? You have some unrealistic expectations of perfectionism, all that kind of stuff. The problem is the superheroes in general have not given us good role models. I think about from my childhood, Batman, Superman, and Lone Ranger, for example. First of all, their helping journeys all were launched with a trauma. Batman lost his family in the alleyway. Superman lost his planet and his family. Do we have any support groups for planetary loss here, Robin? And then Lone Ranger was bushwhacked and he lost his brother, which I can relate to because I lost my brother when I was age 5. Like all of you, your caregiving journeys kind of launched with the trauma. A lot of the people working with the Brain Support Network have had the experience of this in their lives, and that's what launched their caregiving journey, caring for all of you now. So very often it is a trauma that's launched our helping journeys, and that's okay. But they were Batman, Superman, Lois were all very distressed. They were running around and they were not happy. Batman, especially, and Superman. But there are other features that weren't good for us to model, like they were anonymous. They wore masks. Right. And really the message from Carl Rogers, who taught me, and Dame Cicely Saunders at St. Christopher's, is to be authentic, to be genuine. It's so important that we have that. We're not behind a mask as caregivers, whether we're a physician or a family caregiver. We have to be real, and people don't care what you know till they know that you care. Those kind of old-fashioned ways of saying things. They did have superpowers. Do any of you have superpowers? You're thinking about it. You shouldn't even think about it. You don't have superpowers. You're going like, do I have superpowers? Let me see. They were invulnerable. Are you invulnerable? Don't even think about that one. You are not invulnerable, but sometimes you feel like I've got to be. I've got to be this super hero, and you're not. You're a human being. You're vulnerable, and it's important to recognize that and not feel like I have to be super person in some way. No, it doesn't help. Doesn't help. They had miserable personal lives. You have to have a miserable personal life to be a caregiver or a physician or anyone else helping people? No, you don't. Really, it helps though, right? No, you don't even think that. They were one-way caregivers. Remember, who was that masked man? Ran off. We don't even know who they were. They can't accept a thank you from people. And also, they were always successful. Are you always successful? If you think you always have to be successful, like a friend of mine who gets Queen Bee on Connections every day, that's not good. No offense to my person I really love, but she's perfectionistic. She's got to get that every time. So they're not good role models for us. They cause us problems. Now, when we have these unrealistic expectations, what happens is that we can somehow have a lot of troubling thoughts and feelings about ourselves and our helping that we conceal from others. And I've done extensive work on this concept of helper secrets, gathered thousands of helper secrets from nurses, doctors, volunteers, social workers over time, and have analyzed them and have found some themes and this image really captures it. I have distress. I feel a need to disclose it. That's ancestral plane behavior that we've had forever in our history. When you have distress, that's what we tend to do as human beings, is disclose it to somebody else. Mommy, this is what I'm feeling. It's that back to that childhood experience, really. I need support. I need something. But then something stops it. Stigma stops it. Shame stops it. All these social forces stop it. So we're not able to get the kind of support that we need because we're keeping things secret. And that's why a support group like this is so invaluable, because people in this room and the people who are in the support groups that are offered here understand. They understand and can really empathize with the experiences. There are some secrets we possess. There are other secrets that possess us. We seek connection, but we fear rejection. And how you fold your toilet paper, that's a private issue. Whether you fold it or crumple it, whatever you do with your toilet, that's private. I'm not even going to ask you about that. And you should keep that private. But these very personal kinds of struggles we have as caregivers are things that we sometimes need to share with somebody else who's a trusted confidant, not to put it on Facebook necessarily at all, because you can get varied responses. But with a trusted, empathic other, it can be incredibly healing to share something that you feel, I alone am having this experience. A medical error, for example, is something I've gathered a lot of those. I wouldn't share that with my colleagues because they would think so much less of me. How could I possibly do that? So I'm going to conceal it. But when you start sharing these experiences, and I've done a helper secrets exercise with hundreds and hundreds of people, if anything you could share, you'd think no one else would experience this. Actually, somebody in the room would say, I've had the same kind of thing happen for me. So we live with a fallacy of uniqueness, a pluralistic ignorance, and shame. And so these can become invisible stressors for us. So it's very important to share the things that are really difficult in this work with someone. And it can make a huge difference. When the themes that I see in, the helper secrets I've found with analyses of all these data are when they have people report, I've had anger at a patient or family member. I'm sure at some point in time, you've had some anger at this loved one who you're dedicated your life to supporting. It's inevitable. You just get angry. Oh, why'd you do that? Oh my gosh, being emotionally distant. I'm not really present today. Feelings of inadequacy. How many of you have had feelings of inadequacy at some point in this role as caregiver? Yeah, I would think so at some point. What about me? Well, this is such one-way caregiving, isn't it? In fact, one definition of burnout is people, or one of the sources of stress, people in a give context where the focus is on the recipients of care. That is intrinsically stressful. It's helping is naturally reciprocal. Like back in the day, you would help me with your nursing and then I would help you raise your barn. But we're not doing that anymore. We've professionalized everything and we've taken the reciprocity out of the equation. So unlike the superheroes, we have to accept thank you when a patient would say, thank you, Dr. Scheer, for helping me. This is fantastic. I really appreciate what you've done for me. Those are the moments that really keep us going too. So I think some of those secrets are familiar to us. How many of us have said, let me give you an example of one secret that was shared when I was in Australia lecturing. A bereavement counselor said, and just empathize with this for a moment. She'd been caring for a family whose son had died through suicide, hanging himself. Very sad. But as the family and were leaving the client were leaving the room, she yelled out, "Hang in there." Yeah. Now, she was so mortified. She was so distraught about having done that. And she shared this in the group. First, she shared it anonymously. And when we read our secrets anonymously, she said, "No, that's me. I want to tell you that it's me." And we gave her such incredible support, and this was the hardest thing for her. This was going to take her out of the helping professions, right? Other people have collected all these helper secrets. Like, so how many of us have said the wrong thing? And yeah, my lovely mother, I want a little homage to her, primary caregiver. She would come out, she liked gambling, so we'd take her to Lake Tahoe and had to keep her off the quarter machines or the dollar machines, keep her on the penny machines. But so I'm out gambling and I come back at 1 o'clock and we were in a hotel room, you have the room with the door that connects the two rooms. So I could hear what they were saying. So I heard her say, as I came in, it was very quiet, "Don, Dale's still out there." My dad, this, Marine guy, when he was still healthy at that point. Dale's still out there. Somebody could have hit him on the head and taken his wallet. And I heard my dad go, "Dorothy, if I go out there, somebody could hit me on the head and take my wallet." And she said, "Well, then leave your wallet." We can say the wrong thing. So one hospice person shared, sometimes I'm so angry at a patient who's very demanding, wanting something every 5 minutes. This is in an inpatient setting, putting the call light on excessively. Then I feel guilty because they're the ones who are suffering and dying, and I'm the fortunate one. I'm able to go on healthy and able to go on with my life. Then I say to myself, how could you be so uncaring and selfish? You should be doing something else, like working at Kmart. This is when Kmart was still in existence out here. I developed the top 10 signs of burnout once, like David Letterman. The first item was, shopping at Kmart feels like you're taking good care of yourself. And somebody, when I first presented that, said, that is really taking good care of myself. Don't you understand? Now, social, so one of the things we could do is repress all this. And what we know from, for example, James Gross's work here at Stanford is that suppressing and repressing does not work. In fact, you need to reappraise the situation. Is much better, leads to much better health outcomes than suppressing or repressing. There was research by Dan Wegner at Harvard. He's died now, but a wonderful guy. And he did the famous white bear studies. And what he wanted to show is that when you try to suppress something, repress something, it comes back to haunt you. And this is true of secrets that are kicking around in us in the echo chamber of our minds. And he instructed people in the famous white bear studies, don't think about a white bear. Immediately they thought about a white bear. Then he said, try to suppress this white bear. And so they suppressed it. But then what do you think happened? It came back. Suppress it again. It comes back. Suppress it again. You know, there we go. We go back and forth. It's the ironic rebound effect, we call it. It's that when you try to suppress things, when you don't approach them, when you don't process them, they keep coming back. And then you're living with them on a daily basis, and they're causing you all kinds of problems. Self-blame, all these other thoughts, the rumination, all this stuff can cause us problems. Now, I can't get rid of the white bear. So social support is the other twin kind of real resource we need to capitalize and develop for us as caregivers. This can significantly, every study shows us significantly enhance psychological and physical outcomes for caregivers. I think we all know this. It's one of the reasons we showed up here today, is that we know that it makes a difference to be with others or to get support of some kind, the wonderful support that the Brain Support Network and Stanford are providing. But seeking it can be challenging, can it? It really can be. I'm thinking about you all. In hospice, all my experience in hospice is the hospice people would say, I'm at a party and I share, they say, what do you do? Oh, I work in hospice. People go, oh no. They put you up on a pedestal. And the first thing they say is, I couldn't do that. Right? And then the second thing they say is, have you read a book on codependence lately or something like that? Or they walk away, or they don't invite you to a dinner party kind of experience, right? But I think as I'm thinking through, PSP-MSA-CBD, I'm thinking that, orphan illnesses orphan the caregiver because you're isolated. You don't, there's not even a name. In psychotherapy, we have a term for naming your feelings. We say, name it to claim it. But you don't even have a name, really. It's so complicated. You start to, and I imagine no one's expressed this to me. I haven't talked to you all about this experience, but I think, I would imagine explaining to people, what is your loved one suffering from? And you start with progressive, supranuclear, and you've lost them at progressive, right? They're like, they're already overwhelmed. I don't know how much more I can hear of this. Don't have a single name. Whereas with Parkinson's, they kind of get a clue like, well, I've heard of that, or I kind of know my uncle had that, and they don't quite understand that either. But this is a problem, isn't it? That we can't name it. We can't really claim it effectively. I'm sure you all found a way to do that works for you. But we have to find a way to do that, to get support. So do everything you can do to get more support for yourself. Find someone you can talk to in this room, exchange phone numbers, and join one of these support groups here, and do these things for yourself, because this human connection can be the most healing thing possible for us all. So there's no variable in social sciences that's more powerful that I know of than social support. So in terms of its impact across the board on all kinds of outcomes, it's just astronomical. Of course, exercise is also important. I know with Parkinson's, with Jay, for example, he exercised. He was a swimmer. He went exercising, and I think that's how he was able to maintain himself for such a long period. Candace Hogan here at Stanford does a lot of work on this and enhanced brain health. So I think it's really important. And it's also important, when things get really rough, to maybe seek some counseling, individual or group. I think support groups is a great starting point. And then if you need more care, you could maybe seek individual counseling. And I'm sure that would, possibly be the best thing to do. What they find in research, Bill shared this, is they found that when people receive counseling, caregivers generally, they have improved quality of life, lowered feelings of burden, delay in nursing home placement. And they found that in some of these counseling experiences, which I really like when we have more psychoeducational components, skill building component, and in family therapy also, it can take it another level, if you will. And they found that this can have positive effects for Alzheimer's, cancer, and hospice caregivers. Also, you've all heard of mindfulness, and I know it's an overworked construct these days, an idea, but it's very important to be in the present. As I was talking about the pause, stop for a moment, be centered. What's going on? Be in the present, not in the past, what could have been or what I should have done, counterfactual thinking, and not in the future, like what's coming down the road all the time. If you're focusing on that, instead, be in the present moment. That's where we live. And this idea by John Kabat-Zinn, advanced mindfulness, means paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. It's very, very important. This is again sticking. I don't know why. Let me see if I can. There we go. Also, self-compassion, Kristen Neff's concept of self-compassion, being kind to yourself. I often say to my clients, I say, okay, you're being pretty critical of yourself. Would you say these things to your child if they have children? Oh, no, I'd never talk to my child this way. I would never visit this upon my loved ones, right? So remember, self-compassion is important. And finally, we have icons who have inspired us over time. Einstein, only a life lived for others is worthwhile, and King, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Mother Teresa, there's joy in transcending self to serve others. We move toward what we've described in psychology now as eudaimonia, this deeper level of happiness. And then Schweitzer, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know, the only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve. He also said, if we lose our reverence for any part of life, we've lost it for all of life. Yet here he is joking this fun. That's a joke. And then finally, I want to end with this, Marvin's Room. And what, if you haven't seen that film, I would really encourage you to. It's Diane Keaton as a caregiver for 20 years for her father, and her sister, Meryl Streep, runs off and has this wild life, but comes back to kind of work things through. And Keaton says to Streep, oh, I've been so lucky. I've been so lucky to have Dad and Ruth. I've had such love in my life. I look back and I've had such love. And Streep says, they love you very much. And Keaton says, no, that's not what I mean. No, I mean that I love them. I've been so lucky to have been able to love someone so much. People on their deathbeds have told me, everybody loved me. But you know what? I didn't have a chance to really love other people enough. We have mission moments, and where we know like what we're doing is the right thing for us to be doing. When I was dancing with Jay and Barb, when I was with my wife, who was nearly killed in an automobile accident, was in our living room in a hospital bed. We didn't know if she'd walk. We didn't know if she'd recover from TBI, all that stuff. She didn't have dramatic TBI, but you wonder what's going to happen down the road with this. And I think the most significant after 40 some years of being together, where we've told each other we love each other 1,000 times, the most poignant moment for me was at the end of all that, when she just stopped me in the hallway and she looked in my eyes and she said from this deep place, thank you for being there for me. And I can't even describe how it touched me at such a deep level. One patient I cared for, I was with her, I visited her in her home. She was dying. I got her into hospice care. She was an oncology patient. And she reached out. This is 2 days before she died. She reached out and held my hand. I held her hand. And she said, a good life, a good death. Wow. One hospice worker shared, upon meeting a new patient, an elderly woman, small and frail, I was preparing to explain how I could assist her. Before I could begin my presentation, she lifted her hand slightly and then spoke clearly. So you are to be my warrior. You are all caring warriors. So, Irv Yalom, another Stanford person, noted, that your caregiving is, and our caring is going to ripple out across the world. It's gonna spread. It's not stopping here. So your caregiving is going to inspire others, and it's inspiring me. It's inspiring people in this room. It will ripple across the generations, and at the end of your journey, you have given the greatest gift you can give. You're loved. So caregiving is difficult. It is hard. And we can do hard things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dale. That was wonderful. We had one question came in, and if anybody in the room has questions, you have question cards. But we probably just have time though for the questions that have already come in on online. But you have question cards, and just raise your hand and somebody will come around and get them. We've got a lot of helpers today. So one question, Dale, came in, said, yes, I know your talk was focused on the caregiver, but I'm always thinking about my family member. How can I, as a caregiver, help my family member cope with losses that they're experiencing? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, as a therapist myself, I'm inclined to recommend getting them into help with, from a counselor, from a support group, from someone outside the family, because you can't do counseling with your family member. You can provide caring and love, but their inner struggles will be different from yours. So everyone grieves differently. So they may not be having the same experience, and that can lead to conflicts, because you're saying, well, why aren't you feeling the same way I am? And so it's important to have them go out and be with other family members who are experiencing, there's caregiving going on in my family. We just can't beat that in terms of the kind of help we can get. So that's what I'd recommend. It's also just being compassionate toward them in terms of their experience. And yeah, I think we have to keep having a family that's accessing resources instead of closing off. The real danger is when a family starts to close everything off. And then it becomes really problematic, and the conflicts just increase, because we can't work all this out ourselves. Also, the caregivers under such stress, you're not exactly in a position to be a caregiver to another family member.
Okay. Last question is, somebody asks, my family member with corticobasal degeneration, CBD, is mute, unable to speak, and this is causing me great stress. Do you have any thoughts about that?
This is a skill set that I don't specialize in, and I wouldn't even begin to venture. I mean, I know when I've been with my father and Jay and other patients who can't speak, I've improvised, but I'm not sure I'm a real specialist. But I know there are resources right outside this room that we can all have access to that are going to give us more help looking at that. Also, the CBD support group, I'm sure the people in there will give you a tremendous number of ideas. I think it's just so painful. What I relate to in that question is the incredible pain, because when you lose someone that way, you lose the contact, it's very much a very deep, profound grief. I had that experience with many people in my caregiving and my life and my professional work and my family. Just my heart goes out to that person in that moment. So I would say access resources, my main theme.
Okay.
Access resources.
And
They're
support
there.
groups.
There are.
I heard that too. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Larson. That's a wonderful talk. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.